Okay, here we are. Welcome back. All right, so hey everyone, it's Lena Banks. I'm back today with your financial therapy for the week. Thanks as always for listening in. Today we have a great guest. We're talking with a super friend of the show, Andy Cobb, and we're going to be talking about traditional versus behavioral finance. And we're also going to be talking about a few of the biases that we have in our lives that creep into our financial decision making. So many of you guys have probably heard of behavioral finance. I want to ask a couple of setup questions, and then we'll go into some stories and stats, and we'll talk about the differences between the two. And then, like I said, we'll go through some biases, some common biases we have in our financial planning. So curious to know what your financial kind of outlook looked like when you were younger. Did you get a lot of financial education or anything like that when you were growing up?
No, absolutely not. No, my family, we didn't really talk about money. It wasn't like a big discussion, and so I didn't get a lot of good habits out of the gate.
Right.
So that made it difficult to understand how everything worked. Of course, I was taught, this was back in the days of checkbooks and stuff like that, and balancing your checkbook.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Down to the penny.
I know. But for the most part, my parents, I didn't really get much of an allowance that often either. They paid for the things that I needed, and that was it. So that education was not there, and I think that's a huge problem for children these days. You need to be able to understand how the world operates and how to handle money.
Well, it's a common problem, obviously. I don't think any of us got the amount of education in schools that we should have regarding finances, personal finances.
Right.
And that's sad. It's really crazy because it can affect so many aspects of your life. And it also takes a little while to even figure out what your values and your priorities are when it comes to money. So
right.
It's kind of an evolution that needs to happen that doesn't happen and usually doesn't start until you're much further along in life. So everybody knows that this podcast, or hopefully knows that this podcast, is really about getting those conversations started, making sure that we are talking about money and finances and how we deal with them. And so I wanted to share a couple of stats. So in his book, The Subconscious Mind of the Consumer, Harvard Business School professor Gerald Zaltzman says that 95% of our purchasing decisions happen in the subconscious mind and are driven by emotions. So that's 95% of the things that we buy are driven by emotions. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It really is your relationship to money, your feelings, your familiarity about how to manage it, that do make a big difference in whether you'll buy something, whether you'll achieve your version of financial success. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing that our emotions kind of drive some of our choices, but not knowing what those emotions are and how to maybe make some more rational choices instead of being 100% or 95% driven by them. I think that's the challenge. So I put together like a little bit of a traditional theory versus behavioral theory comparison. And the first thing is individuals in traditional theory, individuals have complete self-control. Markets and therefore investors are perfectly rational.
That's not happening with humans.
No, it's not. So the contrast, behavioral theory, is we don't always have self-control. It would be really impossible to do that. Right. And so we should plan for behaviors that are normal, not necessarily rational. There's a lot going on right now in the stock market, and the normal behavior or the normal response is concern and fear and perhaps just you want to sell, you want to get out.
Yeah.
Right? It's very scary. It's volatile. But that's not necessarily the rational move, right?
Right.
So we need to plan for feeling those normal feelings, but then still making rational decisions. And that's
Very hard to do when you see those numbers start to drop.
yeah, it's like I can't tell you how many people I've actually heard from in the last couple of days where it's like, okay, what should I do? Well, everybody's heard buy low, sell high, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just counterintuitive. So even when things are low, people
That panic.
it's a panic response for sure. Okay, so the second thing is traditional theory says that individuals understand all available data before making decisions, so they're not confused by cognitive errors or information processing errors. Even just that sentence sounds cold and like it's not normal.
Yeah.
So, like, how many people look at data or look at what's going on and go, okay, I'm going to rationally process this, and I feel like I've learned all I need
all
to
of
know.
the things, we know all of it.
Yeah.
No.
I've got my mind wrapped around all of it. Definitely not making any cognitive errors. No, behavioral theory says we don't always have time to understand all the data before making a decision, and we make cognitive errors that lead to wrong decisions all the time.
Yeah.
It's pretty impossible unless your job is to understand financial theory to know everything that you need to know to make a decision. So it's
But even then,
yeah.
you can have outside factors.
Oh,
that,
100%.
you know,
And I don't know the precise statistic, but many financial managers do not beat the market as far as an index or a benchmark. They don't beat the market making money moves. So nobody should feel bad about not knowing everything
yeah.
in order to make a decision. The point is, sometimes you got to make a decision regardless, and that gets really scary.
Can be very hard to do.
Yeah. So the third thing in traditional theory is that individuals are always consistent in their decision making, and therefore any unique circumstance will always yield the same response.
Said no one ever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of the same thing as like, okay, if you invest $1,000 and something happens significant in the market, would any two people make the same move in response? And traditional theory says everybody's making the same move in response to a market drop or to a lost job or to needing some sort of emergency fund or dollars. And that's just not true. Many people would deal with those situations in various different ways.
Exactly.
And so we have to be cognizant of what emotions are driving us so that we can maybe shift what that decision is, depending on the circumstance. But it's never going to necessarily be 100% rational decisions that are always the same.
Right.
We're all different people. Behavioral theory says we're not always consistent in terms of decision making, and we are influenced by our own biases. So that leads perfectly into the next part of our conversation, because I wanted to make sure that we kind of outlined some of the things that do impact our decision making. It's very hard to wrap your mind around all of the things that might be influencing you if you don't put a name to them. And if you put a name to them, they kind of become more manageable in some ways, and you can kind of recognize and realize, oh, everybody's probably dealing with this type of thing.
Yes.
And I'm not alone. And so even if it's still affecting me, knowing that, oh, I can name it, I can respond to it, and that I'm not alone in dealing with it, that's huge.
Well, you can't change what you don't acknowledge. And so
That's right.
That's
what we're doing.
Yes.
That's what the
acknowledging.
podcast is about, you guys. We are acknowledging our crazy around money. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So behavioral finance does emphasize the role played by psychology in individual behaviors. And investors and other financial planners, personal financial planning, we're all vulnerable to making suboptimal decisions because of these influences. So I came up with a whopping 13 biases And I've broken them
Good
down.
old 13.
Yeah, exactly. It's the lucky number
Yeah.
of biases. And I've broken them down into 4 categories, which I think are the primary motivators behind kind of our emotional decision making. And I've called these primary motivators the 4 horsemen of personal finance because
I like it.
they really are the key factors driving us to kind of do what we do. So the first of the 4 horsemen is obligation, and listed under that is are 3 biases, and we'll talk about each of them. The first one is familiarity bias. And that just prevents people from participating in unfamiliar activities. It keeps you doing things kind of the same way you've been taught, or the same way that you think is the quote-unquote right way. And so some examples might be somebody who refuses to invest in the stock market because they're a little bit concerned about what's going on, what's all of that about. Or people who won't take advantage of basic banking tools and services that can help better manage cash flow. So when I was doing a lot of financial coaching, small business owners, oh boy, there was a lot of people who wouldn't take advantage of things like direct deposits or making sure that they had separate accounts for their business and for their personal finances. And those are basic things that they just got stuck in, well, this is familiar to me. I'm going to stick with what I know.
The same old.
Stick with what I've been told. And this is under the obligation bucket because it really is kind of a driving force and factor behind sometimes just sticking with what you know.
Yeah. I get that.
Yeah.
I like familiar territory.
If your dad told you that this is how the world works,
right?
You feel obligated to kind of go with that flow. Especially if that flow was right in 1985, and now we're in a completely different zone of financial markets and planning and instruments
tools,
and tools. All of it. Yeah. So the next thing under obligation is confirmation bias. It's very similar, but it's our tendency to ignore information that doesn't conform to previously held beliefs. And then we irrationally believe the information that does conform to our previously held beliefs.
No matter how wacky it might be.
Exactly. And there's like almost a moral obligation to stick to that idea of what we've learned and what we know. And to not necessarily adapt or refine ourselves over time. So it gets a little bit sticky there.
Makes sense.
Okay, the last bias under the obligation horseman bucket is the herd instinct bias. And I think everybody kind of understands what this means. Herd instincts are common in all aspects of society, including in the financial sector where investors or other financial decision makers make decisions based on what somebody else has told them, done, what they heard was a really good idea. It's that kind of thing where it's like, okay, it's probably an okay decision because, there are lots of people jumping off that bridge. But it might not be the best decision for you. And so you shouldn't be obligated or feel obligated to follow the crowd.
Yeah.
So that's the idea. And that brings up a lot of feelings of fear of missing out. But again, you don't want to take the same jump as everybody else, not fully understanding what the consequences are for you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so the next of the 4 horsemen is fear, and I've paired it with denial because I feel like they go together.
Yes, very frequently.
And so the very first of the biases in this bucket is anchoring bias. So that means some investors, some financial decision makers tend to be over-reliant on benchmarks such as purchase prices or sticker prices. It anchors you into a specific place, and you can almost be fearful of going over or under or doing something different than what you have already researched
set idea
and know
of what it is supposed to be.
Exactly. So some examples of this might be looking for a car and you know what purchase price you're gonna go for, and nothing changes your view on that being a good decision or a bad decision.
Okay.
You can start feeling fearful or be in denial about a change in circumstance if you let this bias kind of influence your behaviors. So it's probably a good thing to kind of check in on that and make sure that you're not so stuck to one space
Okay.
that you just continue to move forward. And then the next bias in this bucket is regret aversion. Have you ever thought, I don't want to do this because I might regret it later?
Oh, yes.
I mean, a lot of people will spend the money and not have necessarily any regrets until the bill comes, but like not even being able to make the move before you have that regret aversion is very interesting. So
That is interesting.
yeah, so this is a bias that stems from the fear of omission or commission, and it causes people to avoid making decisions because they fear the possibility of regret.
Well, people don't want to gamble.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
the people that have the aversion to gambling.
Exactly.
Like me.
Well, yeah, and but what's so interesting is you're going to have to make some of these decisions
Right.
anyway. And so that's kind of where the denial comes in, is like, okay, I have a fear of making this decision. So I'm just going to deny that it even needs to be made. Let me just I'll just go over here in this corner. It'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine, right? So
Yeah.
I don't want to regret it. So I'm just not going to do anything at all. So ironically, sometimes instead of being fearful to start managing our money well, we are also afraid to stop pouring it into something that's not working out. And so the last of the biases in the fear/denial bucket is sunk cost bias. And I know a lot of people have heard about this. Like, you keep pouring something into something that's not in your best interest.
Well, you've already come this far.
I know, exactly. Oh my gosh, I could go back to the car example. Like, has anybody ever had a lemon or like dealt with having, where like
My
you're spending
son.
$1,000 chunks at a time, just pouring it into the car? It's a really rough situation. And there is something in that mind of ours that says, oh God, I just don't want to let go.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll get better. Again, the
because
denial.
you don't want to admit
Yes,
that it was a
exactly.
bad decision.
That it was probably not the best choice.
Yeah.
Okay, so the third of the four horsemen is guilt and shame. And again, I've
Nobody
paired
likes
them
that.
together. Nobody likes the guilt and the shame. This is like a huge thing when it comes to finances, because obviously, whether you're not making enough or you're spending too much or you just think you are, that those feelings of guilt and shame are just so prevalent in all of the ways that we choose to manage our finances. So in this bucket, we've got self-control bias, which, guilt and shame go hand in hand with that self-control and discipline, because when you lack that self-discipline, or when you have an excessive desire to control your spending, but you fail at it, I mean, that can cause just a lot of trauma.
Like retail therapy?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, and I think a lot of people do that and they don't even acknowledge that that's what's happening, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or that the feelings of guilt and shame are going to follow it.
Yes, inevitably.
Yeah. And we think about that, I know, a lot when it comes to other vices and things, but money is kind of like food. You got to have it. You got to use it. You have to get it and then give it away. So it's not like you can just check out of finances, kind of like you can't check out of eating. So then it's the next. So then the next question is, okay, how do I control myself? And so this is a human behavioral tendency that causes people to fail to act in pursuit of their long-term overarching goals because of a lack of self-discipline. And that means, I spent X number of dollars on something that really did not improve my financial path, and isn't something that I really value financially in my life. And yet I have done this thing that is not in and of itself. It's like the small cuts. So it's not in and of itself a problem, but you do that, 5-6 times over the course of a month, and it adds up. It adds up. The next thing is loss aversion. So this occurs when people try to avoid losses, even if the loss is acceptable from a rational person's point of view. And again, this is in the guilt and shame bucket and not the fear and denial bucket, because I think a lot of times people really want to not actually lose, so that they don't actually have to log it as a loss, right? So in other words, I'm going to just hold this stock that has no value anymore until, I don't know, whenever, because the moment I sell it, I have to realize that it's a loss, that I actually did lose something here. And I might feel guilty about that. I might feel shamed, especially if I took a risk to get there, right? Okay. So that's what you're trying to avoid.
That makes sense.
Okay, the next thing, the next bias in this bucket is the status quo bias. And so this describes our preference for the current state of affairs. And it results in resistance to change, moving on, or accepting the new reality of our financial situation. And again, this fits for me in the guilt and shame bucket, because a lot of times this happens when we're having a big life transition or a big change. On another episode of the show, we talk about divorce,
right,
and how that really has to shift your mindset. You cannot afford to just continue in the status quo mindset. So,
exactly. You can want it all you want to live the same way as you did before, but that doesn't mean that you can't.
That it's actually going to happen. Yeah, and, there's a lot of guilt and shame attached to that, because oftentimes there are kids involved. There's just like a feeling of, oh my gosh, I've lost something. I've done something wrong. But this can happen in any type of life transition. When you're going off to school, when you're, getting married or something like that, any type of big expenditure, there can be some guilt and shame attached to that, and some feeling that, okay, if I just maintain everything the way that it is, I'm going to be good. And it's just not true. You do have to adapt. You do have to move on and accept a new reality, even if it makes you feel some kind of way. Okay, the last bias in the guilt and shame bucket is the endowment effect. And it describes a circumstance where an individual places a higher value on an object that they already have, an object, a position, a stock position, an asset that they already own, has more value than the same object if they didn't already own it.
Like your home that you've lived in for a long period of time.
Or your parents' home.
Or a family heirloom.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. And so these are things that, again, a rational person who's in debt and really has a problem with cash flow or financing their life is going to go, okay, I got to get rid of that. I got to get rid of it. What can I get for it? Or they're going to say, okay, I have a use for that in the future, so I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to do something else over here to make myself whole. But the endowment effect keeps us in a spot where, mostly, I think, because of some level of guilt, shame, could also be obligation, you stick in the same spot. And you think, what I've got is the best I'm going to get. And so I'm just going to leave it as is. Okay, let's move on to the final bucket.
Final one.
Pride. pride is the final of the 4 horsemen of personal finance. And in this bucket, we've got, again, 3 biases. The first one is overconfidence bias. Everybody could probably guess what this is.
Yikes.
The idea that you're too confident in your abilities, and so you take excessive risks. And so this one leads to a lot of keeping up with the Joneses. You think you should be able to afford something, so you're gonna get it. You think you know what you should be doing, so you go ahead and do it. It's that sort of situation where you're just not accepting any sort of outside feedback because you feel like you have the answers.
Yes.
Hardly ever happens in finance. Like we talked about before, there are right answers for you, but maybe not right answers full stop. And so it really is important to keep adapting and checking in and making sure that you're not overconfident in your position. The next one is self-attribution. So that's our tendency to attribute good outcomes and good decisions to ourselves. Yeah. That was
all me.
I am so awesome. But then bad outcomes are just about bad luck.
Yes, of course.
And then the very last bias is recency bias. So this is, hey, if things have been going great, if you are doing well, you think that's going to last forever. And if not, you don't. And that can be really hard, especially if you are going through a time of challenge. But it's almost worse on the other side of things because it doesn't allow us to adequately plan ahead. So a lot of times in financial planning, I would see clients who would think, oh, things are going to get better just around the corner. I'm going to get a better job. I'm going to get a better this. I'm going to, all of these things. And it's like, I want to believe, and I do believe, and I have faith for you. But let's plan as if
that doesn't
things
happen.
are going to fall apart.
Yeah,
Let's plan for that. And again, you don't have to be like, get to the point where you're like the equivalent of a financial prepper. Like, you don't have to be so concerned.
Well, it comes back to being rational about things.
Exactly. Do not think there is some sort of awesome payoff or payout coming around the corner that's going to solve all your problems. Yeah. Instead of doing that, maybe take a step back and plan for, a moderate future. So,
good advice.
Yeah. So if any of these emotional or behavioral biases rang a bell for you and you're interested to hear more, please like and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a thing. And we'll be back next week with another episode where we'll start talking a bit about how to recognize and be more aware of each of these biases when they pop up. So until then, have a great rest of your week.